Hi, I'm Jim Fenton. I'm based in California, and I'm happy to be able to come to PasswordsCon this year virtually in Stockholm. And I hope you've had a good conference so far. Today, I'd like to talk about the so-called passwordless solutions that are on the market that are being promoted, and the questioning this assertion that the future is passwordless. So let's explore that a little bit. There are a lot of marketing pitches that are promoting a passwordless future. And does that, we kind of wonder, does that mean that users really don't have to remember anything? Or does this mean that they're going to be using biometrics or physical authenticators or combinations of those things for multi-factor authentication? So not to pick on any particular vendor, but I kind of just collected a few of the headlines from some of the passwordless vendors that are out there, and talking about what they're saying. It's the future. You can log in without using a password. All of those sorts of things. So this creates an expectation for users. Does this mean that they don't need to remember anything at all? I mean, people would generally like that, or at least think that they do, because they right now we're being subjected to having to remember scores or hundreds even of passwords that they're supposed to keep separate for each site that they go to, and so forth. So one way to approach this is to use a physical authenticator by itself. And the most common example being a door key, like the key to your home. We do this all the time. We don't do it very often in the case of online accesses, though, and there are some good reasons for that. The threats from using just a physical authenticator by itself are generally that it could be stolen, it could be lost, it could also be broken, which is more of a denial of service sort of threat. And it could also be duplicated. And of course, keys are easy to duplicate, but generally you would notice if you didn't have your key on your person for a little while. It feels a little different in your pocket, unless you've got dozens of them, I guess. Um, and but in the case of a key in the sense of an authentication secret that might be on your telephone or your laptop or something of that sort, it's possible that some malware would come along. Somebody might borrow the device briefly and um, extract the secret from it. Um, so as a result of that, we tend to avoid using physical authenticators by themselves, and in fact, maybe almost to too much of an extent. Um, so this is great. It's a passwordless authentication method, but it's not two-factor. It's not really an improvement in security like so many of the passwordless vendors are promising here. Another approach is biometrics. Again, it's passwordless, but it's only single factor. Um, I mean, a lot of people really think that biometrics are the ultimate in security. I mean, you see this in the movies. You go to you see the person going to some sort of a high security thing, putting their fingerprint on the sensor, or maybe looking into a sensor for an iris scan, and the door opens and they're admitted, and gee, this must be really good. The problem is that there are almost all of the biometric modalities that exist have ways that the biometric can be obtained unintentionally. Of course, a fingerprint, you leave it on every drinking glass that you use. So if you go to a restaurant, the waiter could take your copy of your biometric if they really wanted to. Um, Similar thing with iris patterns. Apparently, iris patterns are fairly easy to obtain, especially if you're blue-eyed, it turns out, um, by just a high-resolution photo of the person. So, there are concerns about the security of biometrics from that standpoint, and they're also not revocable. So, if somebody does get a hold of your fingerprint or your iris pattern or something like that, this is not something that you're going to be able to change. Um, the other issue is that biometrics aren't a deterministic authentication method, or aren't a deterministic factor. Um, if you it's a measurement. So unlike the password is either right or wrong, your physical authenticator either has the right key or the wrong key on it. But a biometric, it if it's close, and that's a decision that the biometric system has to make. If the measurement is close enough that it believes that it's really you, then it will accept the biometric. And they're doing better and better on this these days. They're 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000 false accept rate, which is the measurement of these things, is getting to be fairly common, better than just a few years ago. But you still have the other concerns about whether uh, whether the biometric might have been compromised. And of course, the test conditions for these false accept rates are what they refer to as zero effort attacks. A random person puts their fingerprint on the sensor, or random person looks into the iris scanner, or whatever. Somebody that's a more determined attacker that's intentionally trying to falsify the authentication is going to do better than that. And there's some research, but not a great deal of research available, at least publicly, about what the false accept rates are for other sorts of attacks, where somebody is trying to actually subvert the system rather than just kind of like randomly present their biometric. So another approach, again passwordless, is a physical authenticator with a biometric. And the this is pretty common now. It's being used with your an awful lot of phones have uh, biometric sensors on them, either fingerprint or face recognition types of sensors. They are passwordless. They mitigate the concern of somebody losing or having an authenticator stolen, which is a really good thing. Um, a lot of these devices have and the technology has gotten to where the biometric comparison, the biometric template of what it's comparing against, and the comparison can be all embedded in the device. And that's really good in terms of making sure that my biometric has to be can only be used on that device, and it isn't something where the biometric could be used broadly on all sorts of devices. I'm sure that there are people who would like to be able to go to the convenience store and buy a soda and just put their fingerprint on the sensor and walk out. But the problem there is that if your fingerprint can be used on just any sensor, it becomes a much more valuable commodity than if your fingerprint can be used only on a specific device. And therefore, it's more likely to be attacked in that way. Another thing about using biometrics on a device like this is that you really hope that the just unlocking the device isn't the only time that you use the biometric, because people have their devices unlocked for all sorts of things. They'll unlock their device and they'll set it down on their desk and go and do some work or something like that, and somebody could just walk by and grab it. Uh, for authentication purposes, you would like to have present the biometric, the finger or whatever, in order to specifically in order to authenticate. And so the picture that I've got here shows this is actually Microsoft Authenticator, where I've already unlocked my phone. I'm going into Microsoft Authenticator. It asks me to present my fingerprint once more time, just in order to make sure that it's really authentication that I intend to do. And I think, a very good thing, because it's really not much more effort to present your fingerprint or your face a second time when you want to authenticate. Now, so is that good enough? I mean, if you had something that was something that you have plus a biometric, it seems like life is pretty good. So um, some of you might be wondering why there's a picture of my vegetable garden here, and actually, Pear is probably looking for a cat there. Sorry, Pear, there's no cat. But the the idea here is that when I go out and work in my vegetable garden, my fingers get all dry and sort of dirty and all of that. I can't use the fingerprint sensor on my phone then. I need to use the pin in order to unlock my phone because my fingerprints are just messed up. The same thing can happen if I'm washing something and my hands are really wet, and I want to adjust the podcast that I'm listening to or something like that. I have to unlock my phone with my PIN. So, um, and we're probably seeing a fair amount of this with all of the people with facial recognition and wearing masks on account of the pandemic. I haven't actually experienced that. I don't have a phone that does facial recognition, but I expect it probably has some problems when I'm wearing a mask. So, what do you do then? Well, what you do then is you do what the telephone vendors provide, which is you give an option of either a biometric or a PIN. And so there are a few good reasons to do this. One is that you would ideally like it so that if somebody got a hold of my phone, and we were concerned about somebody getting a hold of your secret key uh, earlier, we don't, if the everything required to get the secret key is in here, and I'm somehow able to access the secure storage in the phone, then uh, the fact that the phone can be unlocked with a fingerprint means that um, all of the secrets in order to decrypt the secret key, assuming it's encrypted on the phone, are there somewhere, and so I just need to do a little more digging in order to find that. If you're using a PIN, that PIN can be used to create a derived key that would then be used to unlock the authentication secret. And so that's kind of a good thing. Of course, you could probably run through all of the pins in a relatively short time, but it's as with most things in security, it's a question of can we make the job a little bit more difficult for the attacker, and it's more difficult for the attacker if they have to uh, go and um, derive the decryption key for the authentication secret by trying 10,000 pins or something of that sort. Um, Another reason to do this is the false accept rate of the biometric. You'll find on an awful lot of devices that it will only give you a few tries before it says, no, your biometric didn't work, you need to enter your PIN. And that's largely due to the fact that the biometric sensors don't give the same degree of security as say a strong password would, or a cryptographic key. So trying to sort of balance these things, it does that. So if this does solve the limitation that I have in my vegetable garden or when I'm washing the car or whatever. Um, and it doesn't require the device to contain the clear text secret. When I first power up my phone, I have to use my PIN the first time, and then that's sort of cached while the phone is running for some period of time, and then every once in a while I need to enter the PIN again rather than a biometric. It's not a huge inconvenience to be able to do that, and it kind of points out that in a lot of cases, the biometrics are really kind of a convenience factor. And by the way, in terms of the security of this, it's really limited by whichever is the weaker, the biometric or the PIN. And they have some different weaknesses from each other, but anytime that you have the option of authenticating using method A or method B, the result has got to be at least theoretically a little bit weaker than either A or B because you've got more ways to attack it now. So going back to the original premise, passwordless authentication. PINs are really just low entropy passwords. Um, I'm concerned about the marketing pitch here because a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, this is great, passwordless authentication. Oh, you gotta still remember a PIN." Well, I'm I'm a little disappointed. Anyhow, I'll let the marketing people deal with that. But it kind of highlights that this is um, a kind of a marketing pitch that we're talking about here. So pins are weaker passwords, but maybe that's okay if we're using it as a second factor, or in addition to a physical authenticator, because um, we don't have, unlike when you log into a website with a username and password, there isn't a big database there of hash passwords that people can go off and attack if they're able to get that list of hash passwords. The verification of the PIN is local to the device. So again, it's a lower value target if it can only be used for one user, and it's the fewer things to attack there. So that's a good thing. Um, there are lots of brute force attacks on pins that can be made, and as a result, you need to consider what the throttling is. Is there a limit on how many tries I can make during a given hour, given day, whatever, in order to keep people from just trying all say 10,000 pins if there's 4 digits. And there are people, in fact, there's in one of my references that comes up later, there's a bunch of researchers that built a little uh, device that went and actually would automate the entry of pins into a phone for testing purposes. And so those sorts of things do exist. And if you're going to use a pin, you need to be a little bit careful because not all pins are created equal. Some of the research shows that 1234 is used somewhat more than 10% of the time by people. 0000 is frighteningly common as well. I forget what the exact number is there, but um, one approach to that is to perhaps not allow certain of the really common pins to be used if you're designing an authentication system, just in order to keep people from using those things that are most likely to be guessed in a short time by an attacker. Now, there's other combinations of authenticators that are still passwordless. Um, One that I've seen is there's some things that use two physical authenticators. Maybe you'll use a physical authenticator and then it'll send you a text message, which is kind of a proxy for, gee, do I actually have this device? So this is another physical authenticator in that case, if it's coming to my phone. Um, so that's not two-factor, because when we say two-factor authentication, we mean two different factors, not two of the same factor. I've seen examples where they talk about using a physical authenticator and then sending you an email. Well, email is terrible for authentication. I know it's very widely used, but it's a terrible authenticator in so many ways because it's very often not secure in transit. There's various threats when you have the email stored on a server, And how do you access your email typically? Probably a password. So not really passwordless anymore, is it? So really don't use email as an authentication method if you can possibly avoid it. Um, of course, the other combination would be two biometrics, and again, of course, that's not two-factor. It's two fingers or a finger and an eye, and uh, kind of doesn't mitigate any of the privacy or security concerns with capturing the biometrics. So it depends on what you call a password, whether the future is really passwordless. Do you mean a password? Do you mean a PIN? Do you mean something else? And or is it possible that when they say it's passwordless, they just mean, well, you don't need just a password, you need a password plus something else, in which case all multi-factor solutions would be passwordless, right? um, if you use a password locally, it's like, unlocking um, an authentication application on your phone, like I showed a picture of earlier. Um, that might have different requirements. I mean, we talk about using, long, strong passwords for normal use. When you're using in connection with an authenticator, um, it probably doesn't have to be as strong. A PIN is probably a reasonable solution there. I don't have a strong opinion about exactly how strong that should be. But I mean, the fact that you've got a physical authenticator with it probably relieves some of the requirements on what one would normally consider to be a secure password. And that's presuming, of course, that it's being locally verified, that you're not just using uh, uh, an authentication device and then doing it as a separate step, sending a password to the server, in which case it's again being centrally verified and is subject to being sort of centrally harvested, if you will. But if you're going to be deploying one of these solutions that is advertised as passwordless, then be careful about what it actually does. Pay attention to what it's actually using, because not all of them are equal. And I thought that the selection of pins was kind of a particularly interesting topic here. So I collected a few papers on, actually a couple of papers and a pretty good blog post about pin selection and pin security that you might enjoy. And so now I'll be available if there are any questions. Thank you.